Okay, today is December 13th, 2018. We're here with Mom and Dad Packard here at their farm, and we're just going to ask a few questions and have them talk a little bit about cousins today. And we're going to have them visit about who their cousins were, where they lived, who they came from, and maybe a little bit about if there's any information about things that you may have done as cousins when you were younger and what you knew of your cousins and those sorts of things. And we'll just kind of go from there. First of all, we'll start with
Well, you're Chad,
I'm Chad. I'm
oldest.
I'm the oldest and the wisest and everything else. It's good. But so we'll just start there and just talk a little bit. So, Dad, do you want to start out a little bit and maybe you can talk about that book? What book you have there?
Yeah, I have a very special book, and since we're talking about cousins, this is probably one of the most influential cousin that we had that influenced the Packards, and we worked with her a lot in order to print this book. In fact, she was low on money in California, and so we Talmadge and I financially supported the printing of this book quite a bit, and so we have inside the book we have 3 or 4 different chapters that we made on some members of the family.
And who was it that did the book?
Her name is Louine Packard Saxon. She was a cousin. Her father was my father's brother.
Okay.
And so
which brother?
That's Uncle Earl.
Okay.
This is Uncle Earl and Aunt Clara.
And didn't we meet, wasn't Uncle Earl from Nampa? Is that where he
Yeah, he was
stayed?
from Nampa.
We met him, I think, once or twice.
Just once. Yes, you're right.
They during our growing up years, they lived out in the desert there past Cuna.
Okay.
Now it's housing.
Yeah.
But
so
they lived
it's
out
the place
there
to be other than Star and Eagle.
Yeah. It was a very important time for us kids when we'd ever get to go to see Aunt Claire and Uncle Earl.
Was Earl older or younger than Forrest?
He was just younger.
Okay.
But the problem is that he had a big family, and they were more the age of my brothers and sisters who were older. So I didn't get to interact with them as much as my brothers Vaughn and Floyd and Ronald and that age. But I did know Louine a little bit.
Okay.
But still, she was
still older.
She was still a little bit older.
Okay.
And if you remember correctly, when you're young, 2 or 3 years makes quite a big difference of who you interact with.
That's right.
But we'd go out there, especially in rabbit hunt and things like that, because they lived in the desert. But she really went to work and gathered a lot of pictures that are very, very rare pictures. And in fact, I still don't know where she found them all. And so if you don't have this book, you might want to try to find one.
Now, I think that book, a copy of that book, is in the genealogical library in Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
Bethany and I have seen that book. We were looking for it when we went there a couple years ago. And it's there in the genealogical library.
Louine has had a lot of requests for it, and she didn't have any more copies, and she contacted me and see how many I had left, and I'd already been giving them to some of the second generation. All of our children got a copy of this book.
Okay.
But in reviewing the book, it does give you an insight into the family. Like, for instance, this particular section is on my grandfather, William Henry Packard. And his wife was Cynthia, and she wrote a autobiography of her life. And it has been very, very valuable as to how they moved from Utah to Wyoming and settled there, became very influential in Wyoming. And then they moved on into Canada, and that's where they lived and died.
Now, and Forrest was born in Wyoming.
Yes,
correct?
He was the first white child, I understand, born in the Bighorn Basin there in just out of Cody in Wyoming. But and some of these pictures were taken by my brothers. They found the old homesteads and things, and the canal where they dug the canal was dug by William Henry Packard and his oldest sons in Graybull there. And then this one here, this chapter here on Cynthia, this is her autobiography, and it is a little bit longer, but very, very informative if you want to know what happened to Grandma and Grandpa, how they met, and the early life of their children, which is our aunts and uncles. And that's where the cousins come in, is all of their children and grandchildren. That's the ones that, and so that's a very, very, very good section here.
And that takes place in the late 1800s, early 1900s, correct?
Yeah, she was born in 1856
Okay.
in Ogden, Utah, and then
And she's a Perry?
she's a Perry.
Now, isn't she buried also? You need to tell them where they're buried, honey. Finally, isn't she in Nauvoo?
No,
Wasn't she in
yeah.
Nauvoo?
She was buried in Nampa, Idaho.
Oh,
I'm pretty
Nampa.
sure.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
which one
Because
is the one?
My mother and father were quite influential in getting them to move out of Canada because it wasn't very productive up there. It was so cold and
Yeah.
so difficult to make a living that most of the Packards moved and were out of there. And same way with my mother's side, which is
The Carters, okay.
Carter's side, and they moved out of there. So there's not very many of them left up here. But she ended up coming into Nampa. And if you read her story, you know, and lots of pictures. Like I say, very, very rare pictures of members of the family that I had never, ever seen.
So you would suggest that when we have time, maybe on a Sunday afternoon or Sunday morning, if you're not at church or whatever, it's a good idea to consider reading up on these histories and seeing the pictures and such.
Take that picture right there, for instance. I was just reading the other day, and I don't think I have ever seen it. That is a picture of all the members of the church there in their ward, the Burlington, Wyoming ward, and the bishop was my grandpa, William Henry Packard, at the time. And it's got all the pictures there, so this would include pictures of my father when he was a child, or young anyway.
Right.
Because he was in his mid-teens, unmarried, but mid or later teens when they gathered everything up and moved to Canada. And he was a driver of the horses, even to drive the wagons and stuff.
And they moved up to, was it Lethbridge or
Yeah, it was.
Not Lethbridge. Not Lethbridge.
Cardston?
Leesville.
Yeah, it's.
It starts with an L. I know that. I remember that. But it's.
I thought it was Lethbridge. Isn't that one of the towns up there that's
it
close?
Is, it is, but
it is.
It's something else. It's.
There's the Canada part. And how she they're in Raymond.
Raymond, yeah.
And they built a house there. This is a very interesting house. That one is no longer existing, but that was built by my grandfather. He was a builder, William Henry Packard.
He was a builder, contractor.
And that house was built in Burlington, and they left it. And then it burned down later. And there's a cabin that there's still there. But anyway, then she gets into the Canada part. And there's a picture that I didn't even know existed. And that shows a picture of William Henry and his boys. Let me see.
They're in some sort of a wheat field or something?
And Forrest was in there, in the picture. William Henry is holding. But anyway, I've never seen that picture before. And then you get into, she goes right into the children. And this is the oldest one, Orrin, And you know, it's a sad story. He had malaria when he left on his mission. He went to the northern states mission.
It's cold.
He was married, already married. He was a young man, and his sickness got worse, and he finished his mission. And they asked him to stay just a little bit longer, and it got sicker and sicker, and he had typhoid fever, not malaria, typhoid fever.
Okay.
And by the time he got home, he was really, really in a bad situation. And he died just a few days later after his return from his mission. And
Wow.
and it shows a picture here of he and his wife that I'd never seen before. And that's Orrin and his wife Nellie. And
they lived where? Were they from Wyoming, or were they in?
I had to go into Canada. They lived
They're
in Canada
at the time.
Mhm,
Okay.
at the Canada. Anyway, it's got, and then the next one in line was Amasa, and I never knew them because they moved into, I think it was California. But again, a lot of pictures
Yeah.
here of cousins. All of these are cousins. This is,
But from the William Henry line.
yes,
Okay.
there's Ivan. He's another one. There was a large family. And all of these pictures here are cousins that are, most of them still living. Let's skip over here. And this is one that I did interact with a little bit as Aunt Matilda.
Okay. Okay.
They and she came by and visited us when I was a child, and I remember
In Meridian.
in Meridian. In fact, I think she took one of the pictures of us on the steps of our farmhouse in Meridian, Idaho, when my hair was blowing and
Okay.
unkept. I think.
Long and flowing, blowing.
And I was only about 9 or 10 years old, but I do remember Aunt Matilda a little bit, and that's a cousin.
Okay.
But she's a much older cousin, and so when she's an aunt,
Yeah.
not a
Okay.
cousin. Anyway, it gets into her family, and then this is the one that we interacted with one of the most was the Beswicks. And this is
Yeah, lift it up just a little bit.
Uncle Alvaro and Aunt Clara.
Okay.
And they lived, they were the closest ones that lived, and they lived in a home, an actually underground type home, between Meridian and Cuna. And we loved to go out there because their boy, they had a couple of sons, Marvin here. You can see a picture of Marvin, and we did get to interact with him a little bit, but he was quite a bit older than us and more like my brother Vaughn or even Jay.
Okay.
But Max was closer to my age, and so there's a chapter on Max
Okay.
and his wife, and
was he in Idaho as well?
he
All
grew
same
up
place.
there, and so
Okay.
when we'd go over see the Beswicks, we'd interact with them and pop popcorn and play games and
Did they have a number of children, or
no, that's it.
just those two?
I think it's just those two because I don't remember any others.
Now, do you know if they were between Meridian and Cuna? I'm sure that was all farmland back then. And did they run a farm as well? And do you know much about the farm?
I can't remember how many acres, but they did have a part of it that was
Not used.
Utilized.
and it still had the sagebrush.
Okay. Yeah.
So it gave you a good idea of what the whole land was like because
Before.
it's just all sagebrush.
Yeah, I'm sure it's
But,
all
you know,
houses now.
It was interesting. We were in Salt Lake at general conference, and wanted to go to one of the wards there because we were there, and we decided to go to the Hotel Utah has a ward that meets
Yeah.
that second floor.
Joseph's
Yes,
building,
yes, they do.
building,
We
yeah.
scooted in there, and there right in front of us was Max. He was much, much, much older than when I remember him, but he and his wife were there, and they had just got back from a full-time mission, serving as missionaries. So he did turn out real well. I don't know how the rest of them turned out, but
Active and stuff.
this gives you an idea of his kids that we never knew,
Okay.
because Max was our first cousin,
Okay.
and these children.
So those kids are like older than me, but just by a little bit, most likely.
Uh-huh.
Or about the same
Those
age.
Now, yeah,
Okay.
they should still be living, right?
Yeah.
You know, pretty much.
Okay.
And then starting with this page 296. This is it starts with the Packards.
Okay.
Forrest Henry Packard, Forrest L. The
Yeah.
Leroy,
Yeah.
and this story here is written by my dad after my mother was airplane accident killed my mother, and so it is a little bit depressive,
Yeah.
a little bit, because he definitely did change,
Lost his wife and things.
because he was in the same airplane accident, and he was unconscious for 3 full months, and made it. But that's my father, and from then on, Leween, the author of the book, had all of us, the children of Forrest Henry Packard, write
Forrest Leroy.
Forrest Leroy,
Uh-huh.
and
So it looks like it's almost a third.
about a
from-
third of the book is
It's from
my
Forrest.
brothers and sisters writing in their stories, and out of that, I think 3 of the chapters were written by me.
Okay.
One of them concerning my brother, just younger than I, named Ben. He was killed when he was painting a bridge, the big bridge that goes from Tacoma, Washington, across the bay, is about the same height and pretty much a duplicate of the Golden Gate Bridge. And his scaffolding fell from that bridge while he was painting it, and it was salt water, and he was killed on impact. Very, very difficult part of my life, and I wrote his part of the story. So it ended up in line.
So I have a question, Dad. What back to Forrest Leroy? Do you know where they got Leroy from? Do you know if that was had any significance to others in the
Not that I know
history, or just that's what your grandmother liked?
of. See, here's the picture of me, and of course
How old were you there?
that's a school about junior.
Was it before your burns?
I think it was after. I think that's a senior picture. I think.
Okay,
But anyway, that's my story. And then right after that,
is Ben's.
well, we have some stories of the kids.
Yeah, it's because we were young families back then.
Uh-huh.
All of us kids were young families back then.
So there's yours
Yep.
right there with
Todd
your
and
wife.
Daphne.
And there's Todd and there's Daphne all on one page. But those are older pictures because the book was written
Sure.
in older pictures. But after my write-up and my kids.
So let's do this, Dad. Let's wrap up.
Let me show you this. Let me show you this picture here.
Okay.
Here, this is a picture of Ben, my brother Ben,
Yep. Very good.
and that is called "Adapted from a Talk by His Brother Bob." So I wrote that and his life story. He had 4 little girls when he was killed. There's Bernie, the next one down. And then it gets into Wake Island. And that is really, really interesting of how she has, and those, I have 2 full chapters here.
Mm-hmm.
My father was captured when he was working on Wake Island for Morrison Knudsen, and he was a prisoner of war in Shanghai, China for
He was a citizen, civilian prisoner of war. Mm-hmm.
yeah, for 3.5, 4 years, the entire war. And so I wrote this one and named it A Momentous Decision, 1941, and then I wrote another chapter here. This is some of the things that he brought back, but this is another chapter here entitled Monuments for Heroes, Dad on Wake Island. My brother Ron was a U.S. congressman, and he was asked to dedicate that monument that he's standing beside, and that's the monument.
It's still there today.
And it's still there today. There are 3 monuments on that island. One for the military that was captured on the island, and one for the civilians. And there's another one there for the Japanese
Right.
that were on the island that
Okay.
all was killed.
Let's concentrate on the cousins.
Okay, it's okay.
Get that next.
This shows you a couple of pictures that we took. There were 6 of us that went out.
Okay, that's awesome.
And there we are at when we arrived at one monument. There's also 60 of the prisoners, ex-prisoners,
That came.
that came to the dedication when Ron dedicated the island,
So,
the monument.
so what you're saying, in a sense, is that if we want to know much about our cousins and things on the Packard side, we ought to consider perusing that book and becoming somewhat familiar with it.
Yep.
Okay.
It's very, very good. As far as interaction with the cousins, we did have one other family that we went to. My mother's brother, Uncle Irvin, and Aunt Stella Carter, and they lived in Nampa, which was not very far from our farm in Meridian, and we would go over there quite a bit. They owned and ran a store, a pharmacy type store, and had a lot of candy and stuff they'd give to us. Again, their children, we did interact with them a little bit, but they were much older.
Did you find that it was just an issue of distance? It was just a ways away, and you were busy on a farm?
We were very, very busy with as many kids. I was number 13 in a family of 17, and we were a very busy family and had many things going all the time. So we didn't get to go very often. And like I say, when we went to Aunt Stella and Uncle Irvin, their kids, I remember they were all married and gone. Okay. I don't remember any of their children being at home when I was young and visited there. But we did go over there a few times, and I knew of their children, but didn't interact with them.
You spent probably, from what I gather, you spent more of your time with your sister Beth and her kids.
Which we treated them more like cousins when really they were nieces and nephews.
Yeah.
But they were our age.
Yeah.
Wendell and Larry and L&D and things, they still are very, very close with us, and we do a lot of things with them. They're because they're our age.
Yeah.
And
a big family, you really don't need other entertaining.
Yeah, you had all the
you take care
entertaining
of
you needed.
each other and do things together because there's so many of you.
And so we interacted also with your cousins, like Dee and Ivalou and those, their children. That's my oldest brother. And then Jay and the twins,
right?
Vaughn and Lon and Dennis, and we still interact with them. And
Yeah.
but they are our nieces and nephews, and we treated them in those days more like cousins.
Yeah.
We interacted with them more like cousins, and many times we'd go to the mountains and do a lot of fun things with them,
Right.
and fishing trips.
Yeah.
A
We
lot
did
of
that
fishing
crabbing
trips.
trip with Larry and Marianne and
Mhm.
into Oregon and things.
Yeah.
Yeah. We did.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. Let's wrap it up and we'll get to you, Mom. Okay.
Yeah.